Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my much belated end of June, now early July 2024 am reading video. If I can even still call this early July, we're certainly inching into mid-July, and oi, I feel like I am racing against a clock here. There's so many other videos and other things I want to do this month, but this feels like a hurdle I have to get over first. So let's wrap up some reading. And speaking of wrapping things up, for my short story intro here, I am reading the final short story in this issue number 55 of Pembrooke magazine, and I'll be starting a new literary journal next time. But first, I'm going to talk about Manifest Destiny by Sasha Wiseman. And I really like this story. This might be my favorite of all the stories I read in this issue, or maybe my second favorite, or maybe my favorite. And so anyway, in this story, we are following the main character, Chloe, while her boyfriend is taking her to this swanky party in Malibu. And Chloe's quite obviously a little out of her depth. Anyway, her boyfriend Bernard is some sort of art dealer, and he's taking her to the home of this eccentric, well, kind of eccentric art collector, I guess, trying to, get the collection. And it's like his house is a kind of a museum, but the party is like this, whole thing of champagne and joints and all of that. And Chloe is largely left on her own for it. And even from the beginning, as they're driving there, you can tell there's a little bit of an age difference. Might feel like, I mean, it actually takes a little while to ascertain that Chloe's 22. But, Bernard is kind of ignoring her and treating her like an accessory, and she can't even open the windows without, asking him to take off the child lock. And, nobody really records her name, and people remember her as the last girlfriend. And even in the car, while he's ignoring her mostly, he's in part on the phone with his ex-wife talking about private schools for the kids. So, you can see a power imbalance. And so basically he brings her as, I guess, this accessory, but he more or less leaves her to her own devices as the guy, the host, is taking him to see his motorcycle collection or whatever. So first it and starts off kind of innocent, where she finds a library and is reading a book, and but then he comes in to say, we're going off on motorcycle rides, and no, you can't come, and I'll be back soon. And that's when she goes to the bar, and, the drinks start accumulating, and she's like getting attention from other guys. And anyway, obviously she's getting tipsy. She is walking around, stumbling. She runs into one person she actually knows, like from a, past gallery event. And he shares a joint with her. You can tell as the reader by this point that, her faculties are much diminished, and they're sitting by a pool, and he suggests, going swimming or, floating in the pool, and she thinks this is a great idea, and is ultimately found by everyone practically naked, in the pool. And that's when Bernard notices her the most, is red-faced about all this attention, and they're speeding home, and he's saying, well, now they all remember you as, the girl from the pool. So in a way, you have to wonder if subconsciously Chloe might have done some of this to, garner attention, so people actually, can't just write her off, as seems to be the usual for this relationship. But yeah, I thought this was really well done. I think Sasha Wiseman is the type of writer, maybe I should be more like, I lean a lot on interiority a lot in my writing, I feel like, and it could lean into melodrama. And we kind of skirt, the surface of Chloe's feelings, but I feel like we get to know a lot about her and her situation. And there's beautiful descriptions of, the countryside and the eccentric home and all of that as well. And I was very engaged the entire time. The first book I finished since my last damn reading video is A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcie Littlebadger. I picked this up actually last year as part of a banned book scavenger hunt that the DC Public Library put on pretty regularly for a few years before COVID, and now has brought back again. So that'll be exciting. But anyway, this is technically YA, and it is a story that leans into the myths of the Lipan Apache people, which I think Darcie Littlebadger, that's her people. And so the story is like a split narrative between one girl who lives in our timeline, who after the death of her great-grandmother, who leaves sort of a garbled message in, an indigenous tongue that she's trying to decipher, she goes down a bit of a rabbit hole trying to kind of figure out family lore. Like there's a lot of mystery around the fact that all of her family members are very long-lived, and her grandmother lives on this property that if she leaves it, she might get sick, and then they have a nefarious neighbor who lives near them and is constantly trying to buy the land. So that's a lot of what's going on for her. And then in the second storyline, we're following a animal person in the reflected world, so Ollie is a cobra person who is being kicked out of his home because, I guess in the cobra society, you leave home at a relatively early age. In fact, he's the last of his siblings to leave, and he, is a bit anxious about it. He's someone who probably could have stayed home a little longer, and immediately his travails to sort of set up camp somewhere else go a little south, if you will, and there's some problems, but he ultimately finds his way to this deep pool, and he makes friends, and he has a couple adventures, but then things really kind of take off for him when his best friend, who was a type of toad, is starting to get sick. And in the reflecting world, these animal people get sick and die in tandem with extinction events on Earth. So Ollie decides he wants to try to save his friend and figure out if he can, solve the problem of extinction on Earth, I mean, of this particular species, which does seem like it's a rather abrupt, extinction. But he's going to do whatever he can, and he, finds a way to fall to Earth, as the title would suggest, with a few friends. And they end up on Nina's grandmother's land, which is connected, I guess unsurprisingly, to the reflecting world. And so they're able to parse together that the Toad's family is this Dallas toad, and there was recently a flood, and it drowned a bunch of toads, remaining toads who were in a lab, and the lab desperately needs funding to sort of get back on its feet to, save the final surviving toad. So they desperately need money, and also Nina desperately needs help about possibly getting her grandmother off her land before a hurricane comes. And luckily, the animal people have some magic with world building, as they call it, that, maybe they would be able to stop horrible weather events. And Nina has some skill from, the backstory about, content creation and making it big with videos, which is something that some of us apparently know how to do. But she is also swindled in doing so. But she, creates a video that seems especially, exciting and shocking, because she has these animal people to, switch bodies and play parts and all of that. And there's other animals who are sort of mercurial, animal people who are mercurial, who also are part of this plot. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this. I had some mixed feelings about it. I thought the world building was, quite fascinating, and, appreciative to learn more about these Apache beliefs, but I do think the plot was overstuffed, and a lot of the secondary characters, it kind of just didn't go anywhere, those subplots. I thought that this read much more like middle grade than YA. The characters felt much more immature than all that, and I couldn't necessarily connect to them in a YA level anyway. I didn't think they were mature enough for that. So, I don't know, it did sometimes feel like a slog to get through until, things finally came together near the end. But, yeah, I'm still glad I picked this up for, a taste of something different. Next, I read Ice Palace by Edna Ferber, which is a book I remember I picked up on my birthday several years ago now. I was at a flea market with a friend, and we were celebrating, and I had heard of Edna Ferber. I think taken a quiz about, Jewish authors who I might jive with a little bit or something from mid-century, and she was the one, and this was the one book of hers I found randomly at a flea market, and so I decided to buy it, and I put it on my Goodreads TBR, and then I have a resolution to read the books that, float to the top of my Goodreads TBR. So here we go. And this book is sort of largely about the mythos of Alaska, as in sort of, I guess you might say, the Western mythos of Alaska when the territories were wrested away from Russian control, and a bunch of American explorers and people who, wanted to make bank on its natural resources came to stake their claim. And so there's two pillars of this story who are sort of two old-timers in the mid-1950s. This was written shortly before Alaska became a state. So these old-timers are Thor Storm and then Tsar Kennedy. Thor is also, sort of like a Russian godly name, as it were. And they have this granddaughter, Christine, who Ferber gives a very sort of melodramatic Alaskan origin story to, where her two parents were caught in a snowstorm, and she was born inside a caribou that her father gutted so his wife could, go give birth in a warm place. And the wife unfortunately did die in the storm, but the father was able to take Christine, his daughter, home, but he ultimately was a bit distant after his wife died and ended up dying a few years later in a bear hunting accident. So Christine is raised more or less between her two grandfathers who are very different. Like Tsar Kennedy is the type of person who sees Alaska as rich for resources, but he's just a sort of a huge capitalist who mostly sees it for the benefit of people who live on the outside. And Thor is the rugged nature man who sees himself as part of the people, and in fact he was the one who married like a part Eskimo, and Christine's ancestry is part Eskimo as well. And the racial makeup of this book is certainly very outdated, the way that the characters talk about it, and there's definitely some racism in here, but there's also, I feel like, on the frontier, ways that the different groups of people can sort of live together and learn from each other. And the book more or less follows Christine as she is attending college, where first she attends for 2 years in Alaska and then 2 years in the outside, and about her development and how her grandfathers try to shape her. And it does seem like she's much more like her grandfather Thor in some ways, but she also has some affinity for her grandfather, the Tsar, as well. I feel like this is also very mid-century sort of writing. There's a thickness to it that maybe we don't have today. I wonder sometimes about attention spans and all of that. But I think it's supposed to be a gripping sort of story. I actually read a review of this book written by Dorothy Parker with her acerbic sort of wit. I have her short stories back here somewhere. I read from them on these Am Reading videos for over a year. So I'll link to that review down below, and she was saying, well, this is obviously meant to be a movie. And indeed, it was turned into a movie a few years later, which I was trying to find to see if I could watch, and I couldn't find a available full copy, but I found the trailer. And I think this movie came out in 1960. It was George Takei's theatrical debut, which is pretty exciting, even though he was playing a very highly stereotypical Asian man, like very hyper and obsequious to the white people, and obviously playing a servant. But hopefully it helped boost his standing for later success. Yeah, I mean, I would think, at least from what I saw of the trailer, that the book has a little more depth to the characters than the movie probably would. There is also Bridie Ballantine, who is the woman who raises Christine, because heaven forbid, the two men take on too much of a domestic role, and, we get into how she came to Alaska. And there is also some subplots about how different people decide to move to Alaska. Some of it's the frontierism spirit, or, going somewhere where, the infrastructure is still being built and you can kind of get a fresh start. And then there's Marines and post-Marines who move their families there as well. So it's really, I guess, trying to, I think Ferber researched and sort of fell in love with the idea of this final frontier of a sort and tried to give it a human face. I think it pretty much worked pretty well for her audience at the time and was an interesting backdrop to as Alaska was actually being incorporated as a state. Next, I just finished on audio Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo, a Nigerian author, and this was her debut back in 2017, and I think I put it on my TBR list shortly after it was talked about, probably on Book Riot, and finally it's got to the top of my list on Goodreads. And this is literary fiction that is perhaps more of a dramatic to melodramatic variety, especially with interiority that I feel some affinity to sometimes. It takes place primarily in Nigeria in the 80s and 90s, although like every new part we jump into 2008, which gives us some texture about where the story will end up. And I guess it adds what's supposed to be some depth to how things break down in the main story, which starts on one level and I think ends on a completely surprising one. And the hook of this story is about Yejide. I think she'd be our main character, although her husband Akin also narrates a couple chapters here and there. And you think the drama is around the fact that Akin's family is forcing him to take a second wife because Yejide has not gotten pregnant, and obviously that's culturally important. And Yejide is not thrilled about this. And there's a lot of a backstory to it too, that, both of them came from polygamous families. Yejide's mother died in childbirth, and her father was kind of there, kind of distant. Her mother was supposed to be his favorite wife, so he kind of kept his distance a little from her, and then also it, groused up feelings of jealousy from Yejide's stepmothers, who never treated her as one of the family. So Yejide does not want to be involved in polygamy, but this is something her in-laws force on them with the character of Funmi, who Akin very reluctantly takes as a second wife. In fact, so you might think there'd be drama, like where, the issue could be that, Funmi would get pregnant first and Yejide would lose her standing, or that Akin would, transfer his affections for other reasons, and that's ultimately not the case. He's much more, he loves Yejide, and they both pretty much treat Funmi pretty badly. Things spiral. Yejide in the very beginning thinks, oh God, I gotta get pregnant right now, and she in fact develops a complex after visiting some, traditionalist, somewhat quacky, I would say, they're presented as specialists, and she convinces herself she's pregnant, and in fact her body changes. It's, and she goes to see neonatalist specialists and all of that, and she is not pregnant, but for a year she has this condition and has to see a psychologist about it. And around this time, we start to get hints that I think are pretty obvious from the very beginning about Akin being the one who is not fertile. And he goes to his brother, Dakun, for help, which I think it's not too spoilery really to say that he's asking Dakun to impregnate his wife. And so that is what ends up happening. It takes a bit longer to get into the next possible drama strain about that being a problem, but a bigger drama strain, this is a very sad book on a lot of levels, is that Yejide has 3 children, and two of them develop sickle cell disease. One of them dies in the crib just very suddenly, and the second one dies of sickle cell disease as a little boy. And so these are huge traumatic events for Yejide, especially because she's putting all of her, self into her children, that, she's thinking that, her children are going to be maybe perhaps the one constant in her life. They can't, get another mother. I mean, I guess technically they could get stepmothers, but she'd be, in her mind, like the only real mother. So, you know, there can't, you know, Akin has a second wife until he doesn't, actually. Funmi dies in mysterious circumstances. And, you know, family is kind of fickle around her as well. And also it's just, you know, the loss of her children is just, you know, it's just, you know, heartbreakingly, you know, put onto the page. And then in the backdrop we have, you know, the dysfunction in Nigeria of the time, of coups and military dictatorships and all of that. And there were a lot of robberies and killings as well during that time that Yejide and Akin and so forth had to deal with. So yeah, there's a lot going on, but I was pretty invested. I thought that I thought that Yejide and Akin, they were, and the other characters as well, they were fleshed out, flawed, but you know, I felt for them as well. Even as I judged them a little bit for, you know, how their relationship started and how they treated Funmi, I felt like there was something very just very gripping and engrossing about these characters and the drama they were dealing with, and how it shapes the rest of their lives. And I think it was pretty gripping, and that people really liked it as it debuted several years ago. And I think the author since then has written another book as well last year. So hopefully her career is going to continue to be on the rise. And finally, I promised I'd get to this book soon in my mid-year check-in. I am reading The Faithless by C.L. Clarke. I'm almost at the end. And this is the second of a trilogy in a fantasy series. The fantasy series is loosely based off of France's colonization in North Africa. But, you know, we're in a secondary world. In the first book, it took place in one of the colonies called Kazal, and our two main characters, who I guess are still our two main characters. Terrain was a conscripted soldier who was taken from Kazal as a baby and comes back to sort of help with the occupation, along with her princess, Luca, who is next in line for the throne and has been sort of coerced into having to prove herself to her uncle, who is, you know, acting as regent. You know, Kazal is a, you know, kind of volatile. They, you know, I think it's a place that there's uprisings, people who, you know, want colonization to end. And so, you know, the people from the colonizer, Belated, want to keep, you know, things as the status quo. So Luca, you know, comes in with that mindset, but she ultimately goes into a more humanitarian aspect of, well, trying to create alliances, and she and Terrain are sort of developing a relationship, and Terrain is coming to a sort of awakening about her place in the world and her, you know, wanting to return to this homeland she barely knows. Oh, and now my battery is going, but basically the story ends with Kazal gaining its freedom, but only from Luca's standpoint. She now has to go home in book 2 to Belated to make it official. But first, of course, her uncle wants to declare a trial of incompetence, and you know, to, you know, first of all get the colony back, and also to, you know, make sure he can keep ruling. And Terrain is there. She now is a member of a council in Kazal, and she's there as a diplomat to, you know, try to make sure this treaty and other things go forward, that they can, you know, get some reparations and become their own land. And so, of course, so that's the major crux of the drama in this book, of how these things go together. And meanwhile, Terrain and Luca still have some feelings for each other. So yeah, you know, this is, it's fun, it's exciting. I worry a little bit that maybe I'm a little too entranced with a certain other fantasy story on TV right now. So, you know, when it comes to, you know, big sprawling world building things, maybe I can only have so much attention span. I'm not sure. I mean, I am enjoying this a fair bit, and it's moving pretty fast, and I'm excited to see where it'll ultimately end up. And that about covers it for me now. I hope to be back on this channel imminently after I, you know, replenish my battery. But now I'm hoping to get into new reading, and I have some TBR games I want to play. So I'm going to start with my quarterly BookTube Spin TBR game, so stay tuned for that. And I hope you are all enjoying your reading that you've probably finished up from June and are starting to get to in July. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.